They told me not to come home because I'd be too hard to explain. 3 days later, the man they were trying to impress called me his boss. My name is Nathan Warren. I'm 32, and I live in a small, quiet town about an hour from Boston. Most mornings start the same way: espresso in hand, weather murmuring softly from the radio, a short walk past the corner bakery to reach my office just 2 blocks away. I co-founded a biotech startup that designs molecular diagnostics for early disease detection, something that's helped more people than I can count, but still means nothing to the people who raised me. My parents never really understood what I did. Or maybe, if I'm being honest, they never cared to. In our family, success didn't look like research or funding proposals. It looked like silk dresses and perfect smiles. It looked like my older sister, Claire. She was 3 years ahead of me and always 3 steps ahead in their affection. She was graceful, charming, the kind of woman who walked into a room and had everyone asking about her skincare routine. I was the one in the corner, drinking stale coffee and trying to answer work emails between bites of holiday turkey. On birthdays, weddings, Thanksgivings, she was the spotlight, I was the shadow. They never said it out loud, but the way they spoke around me said enough. "Claire, you look stunning." "Nathan? Oh, right, he's doing something with biotech, is it?" Like I was a blurry footnote they didn't know how to pronounce. I told myself it didn't matter, that if I worked hard enough, long enough, I'd earn a seat at the table, not the folding chair at the end, an actual place. I never expected applause, I just wanted to be seen. It was late March when that illusion shattered. I had just wrapped a huge Series B funding round with a firm out of New York. I cleared 3 days off my calendar for the first time in months, just to fly back early and help prepare for Mom's birthday. I didn't tell many people, just packed light and called home out of habit. Dad answered. "Hey, I'm heading in Thursday morning," I said. "Need me to grab anything?" There was a pause, then a long exhale. "Nathan, maybe it's better if you don't come home this year." I laughed, awkwardly at first. "I already took time off. I want to be there. It's just," he started, his voice tightening. "Claire's bringing her new boyfriend. He's a CFO, really polished, you know how it is. Your work is hard to explain, and we don't want awkward comparisons." I stared at the wall. "Are you saying I embarrass the family?" Silence. Then a quiet but brutal response. "If you insist on coming, don't call me your father." I didn't say anything. The line went dead. And just like that, so did something inside me. The apartment around me felt hollow. My espresso had gone cold. I couldn't even lift it to my lips. I sat there, unmoving, hearing my own breath echo against the glass. I'd always thought that no matter how invisible I felt, at least I was still their son. Turns out even that had conditions. I stood up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop like muscle memory, then logged into my banking app. For 2 years, I'd been paying every monthly utility bill for that house. Electricity, water, internet, even cable. Over $6,000, 0 cents total. Not counting the one-off emergencies like when the fridge broke or Claire needed help after quitting her job for 6 months to explore writing. I never said no, I just sent the money. Because that's what I thought family did. I pulled up the transaction list. $15.72. That number hit like a slap. Not because I regretted it, but because after all of it, I was still told to stay away. I hovered over each entry, then canceled every single automatic payment. Click. Electric, canceled. Click. Water, gone. Internet, phone, gas. One after another. No alarms, no protests, just silence. The same kind that had defined every dinner table, every birthday, every phone call that ended with "Tell Claire we said hi," and nothing else. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat by the window, watching the light fade from the sky and wondered, not for the first time, how long I had been trying to belong to a family that had no space left for me. A family that saw my ambition as inconvenient, my success as unpresentable. I used to think I was the quiet strength holding us together, but maybe I was just the disposable one. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe I didn't owe them anything anymore. I sat in that same worn leather chair by the window, the one I'd bought secondhand during my first year of struggling rent and late-night ramen dinners, and stared at the screen. Numbers glowed back at me, sterile, unbothered, factual. $15,720, 0 cents. Over 2 years of utility payments, transfers, and top-ups. No thank you, no birthday calls, no how's work, or are you sleeping okay? Just transactions, like I was some invisible service running quietly in the background, expected to show up, but never seen. I scrolled through each line like someone flipping pages in a book they didn't realize they'd written. Electric, water, internet, cable, monthly, religiously, without fail. Even when I was barely breaking even, I still sent it. And for what? To be told I was a burden to the family image? That I shouldn't show up because I wasn't as shiny or easy to explain as Claire's CFO boyfriend? The ache didn't come in waves. It was constant, low and cold, like a room slowly losing heat. I hovered my mouse over the first bill, my cursor blinking like it was daring me to stop pretending. I clicked. Cancelled, one by one. No ceremony, no drama, just a quiet severing. Electric, gone. Internet, done. Water, cable, auto debit, all turned off, with a few simple confirmations. My inbox pinged back with subject lines like autopay cancelled and change confirmed, like soft echoes in an empty hallway. Nothing fought back, nothing resisted. The systems just let me go, and for the first time, I realized so had they. That night, I didn't cry. I cleaned. I wiped the kitchen counter until the marble gleamed, folded towels with methodical care, even rearranged the books on my shelf by theme instead of author. Because when emotions are too loud, you turn down the volume with silence. I didn't answer my phone when it buzzed. Claire's name popped up once, then again, then Mom's, then Dad's. I let them fade into missed calls, each one like a missed opportunity they'd created, not me. I poured myself a glass of cold water and stood by the window. Outside, the Boston sky was bruised purple with dusk, and streetlights flickered on one by one like hesitant truths. I thought about the way my father had said it. If you insist on coming, don't call me your daughter, as if my existence required approval, as if my presence had become inconvenient. I took a sip of water, still gripping the phone in my hand. My thumb hovered over Claire's last message, unopened, but I didn't need to read it. I already knew. It would say something like, "You ruined everything," or "Mom cried all night," or the classic, "You didn't have to go this far." But I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd simply stayed put for once, and the world had shown up to reveal the cracks all by itself. I didn't cancel the payments to get revenge. I canceled them to reclaim my name in this family, if only to myself. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The air in my apartment was cool and still, the hum of the old refrigerator barely audible. There were no parties happening downstairs, no one to entertain. No spotlight, just me, and maybe for the first time, that felt like enough. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I opened my laptop again and checked my company dashboard. The quarterly reports had just been uploaded. New partnerships, fresh funding rounds, growth projections, stronger than we'd dared hope last year. I should have been proud. I was proud. But even in the glow of those wins, I still felt a hollow ache beneath it. Because no matter how high you rise, there's a part of you that always remembers the first time someone you love told you they'd rather you not come. And you can't unhear that. You can't undo how it made your hands shake while canceling the bills. You can only breathe through it. Own it. Build something better from it. So, that's what I did. Quietly, without their applause, without their names in the credits. Because if I was always going to be the one who paid for the lights, then I deserved to be the one who turned them off. The day of the dinner, the one I was told not to attend, came with a strange kind of clarity. Boston was cold, damp, and gray, like the sky knew it had nothing to celebrate either. I brewed myself a strong cup of black coffee, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the phone sitting face down on the nightstand. It hadn't rung since last night. No follow-ups, no apologies, not even a guilt-laced message masked as concern. Just silence. It was almost impressive, the way they could cut you out so surgically and still expect you to bleed on command. I didn't dress up that day. No need to pretend. No one was watching. No one cared what I wore, whether I was presentable, or if I made a good impression on someone who made a lot of money and knew how to smile for pictures. Claire had always been the one to carry those hopes. I was just the scaffolding they used to hold her higher. At 4:05 p.m., right around the time guests were probably pulling into the driveway of my parents' house, I opened my work laptop and signed off on a milestone contract we'd been chasing for 7 months. No champagne, no applause. Just the soft chime of an e-signature confirmation and the slow exhale of relief that came with knowing I was still building something real, something that couldn't be revoked with a single phone call. At 5:17, a message came through from Claire. "Internet's out. Mom's freaking out. Can you fix it?" That was it. No greeting, no context, not even a question mark, just an expectation dressed as a demand. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked my phone and placed it upside down again. Let the silence answer. At 5:42, a text from my mom. "Guests are here. No water pressure." "Something's wrong again. Can you check, please?" I imagined the scene. Polished floors, catered food, Dad pretending to laugh at Liam's finance jokes, Claire glowing under the chandelier like she always had, and behind it all the quiet absence no one wanted to acknowledge. Me. The daughter who'd stopped paying the bills. The one they'd rather not explain, the name that no longer fit the narrative. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel the urge to, because I had already given more than they ever noticed, and for once, I was finally done showing up for a seat they never intended to offer. At 6:10, Dad's name lit up the screen. A call this time. I let it ring. Then a voicemail. "Nicole, this is your father. I don't know what game you're playing, but your mother's stressed, your sister's in tears, and there are 20 people here wondering why the house isn't functioning. You've made your point, now do the right thing and take care of it." I listened to the whole thing. Every word dipped in the kind of tone that assumes you're still obedient, still reachable, still part of the family tree they only water when it bears fruit. Then I deleted the voicemail and poured another coffee. I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I just stopped making sure it ran. They had built this dinner without me. They had decided I wasn't the right flavor of success, the right version of daughter. So let them have it. The performance, the curated smiles, the flickering lights in a house they'd kept warm with my money, but never my presence. I sat on my balcony as dusk settled in, a soft fog wrapping around the edges of the city like a curtain being drawn. Somewhere across town, Claire was probably trying to explain to Liam why the Wi-Fi was down, why her mother looked pale with stress, why the evening was unraveling thread by thread. I didn't wish her harm. I just didn't stop the unraveling. And that's the difference. This wasn't vengeance. It was withdrawal. The kind that feels like peace to the one who walks away and like chaos to the ones who assumed you'd always stay. At 7:03 p.m., a final message came from Claire. "You knew the timing. You could have waited. Why now?" I didn't answer, but I whispered the truth into my empty apartment like it might echo somewhere they'd never hear. I waited my whole life. This was just the first time they noticed I was missing. I found out who Liam really was, not through gossip or photos, but through a name that appeared where it shouldn't have, on my company's internal transfer list. Just a few days after the dinner I wasn't welcome to attend, while I was reviewing staff relocations from our New Jersey office, the name Liam Prescott hovered on my screen like a ghost I hadn't expected to meet again. Head of finance, transferring to Boston HQ, pending final approval, me. I stared at it for a moment, and then the absurdity unfolded. Claire's boyfriend. The man who was so important, so shiny, so presentable that my father asked me not to come home just to avoid comparisons. And here he was, unknowingly placed right under my oversight, reporting to the sister who embarrassed the family. I didn't rush to react. I didn't send emails or cancel his file. I just sat still, let the weight of the irony settle like dust. The universe had a dark sense of humor, and this time I wasn't the punchline. I was the punch. The day Liam walked into the Boston office, I was already at my desk reviewing quarterly budgets. My door was open. I like to keep it that way. Transparency is something I never had growing up, so I build it wherever I can. He walked in like most new hires do, confident posture, neat folder in hand, polite but expectant. Then he saw me, and everything in him froze. "Nicole?" He said it like a question, like my name had betrayed him somehow. I didn't flinch. "Mr. Prescott," I nodded. "Welcome to Pacific Genomics. You'll be working under my department this quarter. Let's review your onboarding together." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Just professional, poised, and sharp enough to cut if necessary. He sat down, suddenly smaller in the chair, his eyes darting across the walls, perhaps searching for a window to climb out of, but there were none. Only glass. Clear, unforgiving. The meeting went by in silence, wrapped in corporate vocabulary. Budget ratios, forecast models, expense thresholds. Not once did I mention Claire. Not once did I say anything about who I was to him outside these walls. Because I didn't have to, he already knew. And the weight of that realization sank into his voice, into the quiet "thank you" he muttered before leaving my office, holding the same folder with far less certainty. That night, I received an email from him, short, almost apologetic. Nicole, I didn't know. If I had, I would have never. But he didn't finish the sentence. Because there was nothing to finish. He hadn't done anything wrong. Unless you count falling for a woman who built her world on the backs of edited stories and unspoken family hierarchies. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because some messages are better answered with distance. The next week, Claire called. It wasn't about me. It never was. I don't know what's wrong with Liam, she said, voice cracking beneath forced confusion. He's been quiet since the dinner, distant. Do you think you could talk to him? You two are colleagues now, right? I could hear the edge in her voice, desperation wearing a mask of casual inquiry. He's your boyfriend, Claire, I said, not my employee. She hesitated, probably realizing too late she'd walked into a room where she no longer controlled the lights. Please, she said, just find out what he's thinking. You're good at reading people. I almost laughed. Good at reading people? I'd spent my whole life reading people who refused to see me, and now she needed help interpreting silence. How poetic. I didn't follow up. But I did see Liam the next morning in the break room, staring at the coffee machine like it held the answers to his life. I walked past him, picked up my espresso, and said calmly, "When people show you who they are, believe them." He looked at me stunned. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. That afternoon, Liam submitted a request to speak with HR. The day after, Claire called again. Did you say something to him? Her voice was no longer polished. It was cracked, raw. He's talking about taking a leave. What did you do? I didn't respond right away. Then I simply said, maybe. For the first time, he saw the truth. I hung up before she could twist the silence into blame. That night, I opened a new document. Not for work, not for revenge, just a page titled, What I've Learned from Being Invisible. The first line I typed, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people walk into their own reflection. And Liam? He was finally standing in front of the mirror. I used to think there were lines people wouldn't cross, especially when it came to family, especially when it came to life and death. But that illusion died the moment I stepped out of that hospital room and into the chilled corridor to make the hardest call of my life. My niece had just been diagnosed with a rare pulmonary condition, her breathing shallow, her body limp in the hospital bed, the sound of the oxygen machine louder than any argument I'd ever heard at home. Her mother, my sister Claire, was too shaken to speak. Her fiancé Liam was unreachable. The doctor's estimate was clear. We had 72 hours to approve a treatment plan that would cost $94,000, 0 cents, not including the extended recovery care. Claire had no savings left. She had drained it all on wedding preparations and designer labels, convinced that appearances would carry her further than preparation ever could. I stood there, holding the file in one hand and my phone in the other, staring at the number as if the act of calling would somehow erase every word my father had ever said to me. I didn't want to make that call, but I did, because I still believed somehow that when a child's life was on the line, people would forget their pride, their pettiness, their polished facades. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice, calm, composed, just as I remembered. Hello? Dad, it's me. We're at Massachusetts General. Ava's not well, she needs urgent treatment. Claire can't afford it. I'm willing to cover some of it, but Nicole, he interrupted. I'm sorry to hear that, but we're not in a position to help right now. I blinked. Not even a little? You just renovated the house, didn't you? Yes, and it nearly drained our reserve, he said, like I was being unreasonable for asking. We're not an ATM, and frankly, I thought you'd be more self-sufficient by now. I froze. This isn't about me, I said, voice low. It's your granddaughter. He sighed. She's Claire's daughter. Claire should handle it. I bit back the words that wanted to tear out of me. She's family, I whispered. So was I, he replied, once. Then he hung up. I stood in that sterile hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing above me, phone still pressed to my ear like I could dial back time and call a version of him who used to tuck me in at night. I had no tears left, only this quiet burn in my chest, the kind of ache that doesn't scream, just smolders. That night, I emptied my emergency fund, then my brokerage account. I sold the car I had saved 4 years to buy. And when all of that wasn't enough, I called my co-founder and offered to forego 3 months of salary in exchange for a short-term company loan. You okay, Nick? He asked, voice gentle. No, I said, but I will be if we get through this. The transfer cleared the next morning. The treatment began that afternoon. I didn't tell Claire where the money came from, not yet. She was too focused on Ava's vitals, too consumed by guilt to process anything beyond the beeping monitors and clipped medical updates. But I noticed the way her hand gripped mine every time a nurse came in. She didn't thank me, not with words, but in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen since we were kids. Dependence without pride, desperation without polish. It didn't make me feel powerful, it made me feel alone. A week later, Ava opened her eyes fully for the first time and whispered, "Hi, Uncle Nick." I broke then, not with sobs, just one silent exhale that seemed to carry the weight of my entire childhood. I stepped outside the room, leaned against the wall, and finally allowed myself to breathe. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder titled Family Photos. One by one, I deleted every image that had once made me question my place in their world. The birthdays I wasn't in, the holidays where I stood off to the side, the dinners where I paid the bill but was never in the toast. When I got to the last image, Claire holding Ava as a newborn, me standing just behind her, half cropped out, I hesitated. Then I clicked delete. Because some things aren't worth archiving. Some things aren't broken. They were never built. I didn't need proof of where I once stood. I needed room for what I was about to build, a future defined not by who chose to leave me out, but by who I chose to fight for, even when no one else did. It was a Thursday night when Claire texted me. A single line that said, "You missed the family dinner. Mom made your favorite." I stared at the message for a long time, letting the irony sink in. My favorite meal, cooked by the woman who hadn't called once when I was spending 20-hour days scrambling to keep Ava alive. A family dinner, hosted by the man who told me not to call him father if I insisted on being present. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. That same night, Ava was sleeping in a hospital bed with wires still taped to her chest, her breathing steady for the first time in weeks. And Claire had taken her makeup bag, her best dress, and her charm back home to play the role she knew best, the daughter they could be proud of in public. I sat beside Ava's bed, one hand resting gently on her wrist, the soft pulse beneath her skin reminding me of what mattered. I didn't need to be at that table. I was exactly where I belonged. Around midnight, a nurse stepped in, whispering that visiting hours were technically over. I smiled and nodded, but I didn't move. My laptop was open on the side table, reports unread, emails stacking up, but none of it mattered more than the rise and fall of Ava's chest. I thought about that dinner, the candlelight, the polite laughter, the second servings, and wondered if anyone had noticed the empty chair. Probably not. Maybe someone had asked, "Where's Nicole?" And my father had replied, "Busy probably," without a second thought. That was how it always was. They didn't miss me. They missed the convenience I used to bring. And now that I was gone, their discomfort wasn't about loss. It was about logistics. Who would pick up the slack? Who would cover the bills? Who would absorb the awkwardness? Claire's text came again the next morning. "Mom says she saved you a plate. You should come by and get it before it spoils." I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. The absurdity of it settled in. A plate of food is a peace offering for a wound they refused to name. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked with Ava through the hospital corridor later that afternoon. She was weak, but she smiled, gripping my hand as if it anchored her to the world. Her voice, soft but full of life, asked, "Will I get to go home soon?" I crouched beside her and nodded. Soon. Real soon. Her eyes lit up, not because I had promised a room with fairy lights or new toys, but because she believed me. That trust was everything, and in that moment I realized something that stayed with me. There are dinners you miss and think about for years. And then there are lives you save that make every empty chair worth it. Claire never asked how Ava's treatment was going. Neither did my parents. They didn't send flowers, they didn't drop off soup, they didn't even post a vague prayer on social media. What they did do was send another message 3 days later. "We're hosting Liam's parents next week, please don't make things uncomfortable." That was their concern. Not Ava's healing, not my exhaustion, but optics, impressions. I didn't respond. I simply forwarded the message to Liam. No explanation, no caption, just a mirror held up to his illusion. He didn't reply either. But 2 days later, Claire messaged again. Liam's acting strange. Did you say something to him? I left her on read. Because this wasn't about whispers or revenge. This was about clarity. And the more they tried to dance around it, the more the silence grew heavy. That weekend, Ava was discharged. We took her home, the real kind, not the polished one with chandeliers and family portraits that had been selectively cropped. Matt made her pancakes in the shape of stars. I helped her pick out stickers for her new oxygen monitor, and Claire's name never came up, not once, because Ava, in her innocence, understood something I had taken 30 years to learn. Family isn't who claims you when it's easy. It's who stays when everything falls apart. That night, I tucked Ava in, kissed her forehead, and stepped out onto the small balcony with a blanket and a cup of tea. The stars were faint, hidden behind Boston's glow, but I didn't need to see them. I had enough light in my life now. I had missed a dinner, yes, but I hadn't missed the chance to do what mattered. And in that quiet, in that peace, I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had finally found one. It was a cold Tuesday evening when the phone rang, sharp and unexpected, slicing through the quiet like a blade. I was in the middle of reviewing Ava's follow-up schedule, blood work, scans, a mild nutrition plan, when the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over a year, Claire. For a second, my thumb hovered over the decline button, but something in me said, let it ring. I didn't answer. I waited, let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, another call came in, this time from my mother, then another, from my father. I didn't touch the phone. I watched it blink, flash, vibrate, then fall still again. And then finally, one last message from Claire. Liam left. He walked out. Said everything he believed about our family was a lie. He said he couldn't look at me the same way anymore. I closed my laptop, stared at the wall, and breathed. Not with satisfaction, not with vengeance, just with the quiet realization that life had finally delivered what truth alone could not. I hadn't sent a message, hadn't called him, hadn't even looked him in the eye since the day he joined the team. But he had eyes. He had ears. He had watched, listened, felt, and chosen. Not me. Not my version of events. Just the plain, unpolished truth. He saw the cracks and couldn't pretend anymore. Claire's follow-up message came in quick succession. Did you say something to him? Please tell me you didn't poison him against me. I stared at the words, the way she framed it, as if love was a thing that could be stolen. As if respect was something you could hoard, as if it was easier to believe I had whispered something than face the idea that maybe, just maybe, she had undone herself. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because she didn't deserve them. I had been silent too long for her to misunderstand now. This wasn't about revenge. This was the sound of consequence, of years of disregard folding in on themselves like rusted hinges. 2 days passed. Then a letter came in the mail, not digital, not typed, but handwritten, from my mother. The envelope smelled faintly of perfume, the handwriting careful, but on inside, a folded card. No Dear Nicole, no Love Mom, just a message written in clean blue ink. If you had come to the dinner that night, maybe things would have gone differently. Claire says, you're holding on to old pain. I think you need to grow past it. Family is still family, even if they disappoint you. That's what forgiveness is for. I sat with the card in my lap for 10 full minutes before moving. Not because I was stunned, but because I wasn't. Because this was exactly the kind of gaslight my family had always excelled at. You get cut and they hand you a mirror and ask why you're still bleeding. You get excluded and they wonder why you're being distant. You stay silent and they interpret it as a tantrum. I stood up, walked to the fireplace, and dropped the card into the flames. Watched it curl, blacken, vanish. I wasn't holding on to the pain. I had just stopped hiding from the pattern. Claire lost Liam not because of me, but because he saw the same pattern too. A family that praised illusions, ignored substance, and expected silence to be the highest virtue. The next morning, Ava climbed into bed with me, snuggled up, and whispered, Mom, I had a dream we had a really big house with books on all the walls and pancakes every morning. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. Sounds like a dream worth chasing. And in that moment, I understood something simple but unshakable. She would never grow up wondering if she was loved less. She would never sit in a corner watching someone else get a celebration for being average, while she broke herself for excellence. The cycle ended with me. Later that week, another message came in, this time from Liam. Thank you for not stepping in. Your silence spoke more than anything you could have said. I see everything now. I wrote back 2 words, so do I. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require confirmation, just the courage to let them land where they will. That night, after the last message from Liam, after the letter from my mother had turned to ash in the quiet flicker of our fireplace, I found myself standing at the edge of Ava's bed, just watching her sleep. Her breathing was soft, steady, the kind that only exists when a child knows nothing in the world will hurt her while she's under your roof. I sat down gently on the side, careful not to wake her, and just stared at her tiny hand curled around her stuffed bear, the one with the torn ear and faded pink bow she refused to replace, the same one she clutched when the nurses wheeled her into surgery. I remembered that moment, the sterile hallway, the two bright lights, the way my heart wanted to rip itself out of my chest and follow her in. I had stood there that day with Matt and promised silently, if she makes it, I'll never let anyone make her feel unworthy again, not in blood, not in business, not in love. And tonight, as I watched her chest rise and fall beneath the soft purple blanket, I knew that promise hadn't expired when the doctor came out and said the words, "successful procedure." That promise had only just begun. Because it wasn't just about keeping her alive, it was about teaching her how to live, how to stand in a world that rewards polish over truth, how to speak when others expect silence, how to walk away when staying means bleeding slowly. I reached down and brushed a strand of hair from her face, my fingers trembling not from sadness but from awe, because this child had endured more than anyone her age should have, and she still smiled like the world was good. She had no idea what I'd walked through for her, how I'd swallowed pride, grief, and the weight of every no that came from people who were supposed to love her. But maybe one day she would. Maybe one day she'd understand why her grandparents never came around, why holidays were quiet, why she had a second family, Matt's parents, who never missed a birthday, a ballet recital, or a scraped knee. And when she asked, I wouldn't lie. I'd tell her the truth, not to poison her, but to protect her. I'd tell her that some people will only love you when it's convenient, that some families aren't broken by accident, but by design, that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself and your children is to choose to stop asking for a seat at a table that only ever served disappointment. She stirred slightly, letting out a soft sigh, and I realized my hand was still resting on her back. I stayed like that, anchored in the moment, not needing anything else. Not revenge, not apology. Just this, a quiet night in a safe home, with the child I fought to keep breathing. I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered it into the dark. Words I hadn't spoken aloud until now, even to myself. I promise I'll never let them touch your light, not with their silence, not with their shame, not with their conditions masquerading as love. I stood slowly, walked to the door, and looked back one more time before turning off the light. The hallway was dim, but it led back to a home that pulsed with truth, and that was enough. I didn't need closure from my parents. I didn't need Claire to change. I didn't need the past to soften. All I needed was the strength to stay on this path, the one where Ava would grow up knowing she was wanted, chosen, protected. The one where I could look at myself in the mirror and no longer see the girl who waited for someone to say, "We're proud of you," because I was done waiting, and I was already enough. It started as a simple email buried between site visit confirmations and a vendor invoice dispute, the kind of message I almost deleted without reading. But something about the subject line made me pause. Feature, opportunity, resilience, and rise. I clicked it out of habit, expecting spam, but it was real. A journalist from a mid-tier digital publication had come across a LinkedIn article Matt's cousin had posted, one about Ava's surgery, the crowdfunding effort, and how my interior design studio had survived a storm most startups would have sunk in. The email was polite, professional, curious. Would you be open to sharing your journey as a founder, mother, and someone who rebuilt everything from rock bottom? At first, I hesitated. I wasn't looking for attention. My goal had never been to become some storybook phoenix rising from ashes. I had just wanted to keep the lights on, save my daughter, and make sure no one ever looked at her the way they once looked at me. Like I was a placeholder until the real star walked in. But Matt read the email over my shoulder and said, if it lights a fire in just one woman like you were 2 years ago, it's worth it. So I said yes. The interview was scheduled for a crisp Wednesday morning. The journalist's name was Heather, a sharp-named woman in her late 30s who arrived with a voice recorder, a spiral-bound notebook, and the kind of presence that said, I've heard it all, but still leaned in like your story mattered. She didn't ask about profit margins or supply chains. She asked about Ava. About that night I walked out of my parents' mansion empty-handed. About how it felt when people who shared my DNA watched me break and blinked as if I were inconvenient background noise. I answered carefully, honestly, without trying to make myself look better. I told her about the way the world gets quiet when you realize your value to some people ends the moment your usefulness does. I told her about Carol and Henry, Nat's parents, who sold the only home they'd ever known to save a child not of their blood but of their love. I told her how that act didn't just fund Ava's surgery, it rewired my entire belief system. I said, the people who show up when it's hard, when there's no spotlight, no applause, those are your family. Everyone else is just furniture in the house you're trying to escape. She asked me what success meant now, and I looked at the sunlight hitting the corner of the conference room wall and said without thinking, peace. Not owing anyone an explanation for being alive. That's success. 2 weeks later, the piece went live. I didn't even know it had gone up until my phone buzzed with a message from an old college professor. You've always had it in you. Thank you for reminding me what strength really looks like. I blinked at the words, confused, then clicked the link he included. The headline was stark and elegant. She knocked on the wrong door, so she built her own. There was my face, not airbrushed, not filtered, just me. The caption underneath. Emily Monroe, founder of Hearth and Form, on rejection, resilience, and how one hospital bed lit the match. I read the article once, then twice. Heather had kept her promise. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't pity-laced. It was just the truth, stripped down and offered like a mirror to anyone who had ever stood outside their own family's warmth, wondering why they were always the one left shivering. And then it started. Emails, messages. Some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to since high school, others from women in industries like mine, who whispered things like, I thought I was the only one who didn't get a seat at the table. But the message that hit the hardest came from a single mother in Arizona. Your story gave me permission to stop begging. Thank you for showing me it's okay to walk away and still rise. I sat with that one for a long time, just holding my phone like it might crack under the weight of how far this had traveled. I hadn't planned to start a fire. I'd only lit a match to keep my daughter warm. But now that the flames were visible, I wasn't going to hide them, because maybe, just maybe, there were other people out there trying to survive the cold. And now they knew there was someone who had walked through the same storm and made it out without burning her soul. The article didn't go viral overnight, but within a week it was everywhere. Not because of some dramatic twist, not because I dragged names through the mud, but because it was quiet and honest and made people feel something they hadn't let themselves feel in a long time. And suddenly, the world started calling me brave. They called me resilient, unbreakable, a model of strength under pressure. I smiled politely through the compliments, nodded through the invitations, sat on stages with warm lights and gentle moderators asking how it felt to be an example. But none of them saw the nights I sat alone in the dark, holding Ava's old hospital bracelet in my hand, like it was some kind of lifeline to a moment I never wanted to relive, but never wanted to forget either. They didn't know that even after the applause faded, I still sometimes walked into a room and instinctively braced myself for someone to ignore me, that I still had moments where I stared too long at family photos in magazines, wondering if those people ever looked at their daughters and felt shame just because her dreams didn't fit into a dinner party conversation. They knew the version of me that smiled at the camera and said, "You can rise again." But they didn't know how many times I almost didn't. When the interview aired on a national morning show, the host called me a quiet revolutionary. I didn't know how to respond to that. What do you say when people assign you titles you never asked for? I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to survive mine. But once the story spread, so did the consequences. My company's website crashed from traffic. Clients I had once pitched to and been politely dismissed by suddenly called back with urgency in their voices. Investment offers started trickling in. Collaborations, speaking events. My face on a billboard downtown with the slogan, "Designing Strength, Building from Truth." And in the middle of all that noise, my parents went silent. For a while. Then the first message came from my father. It wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was just 4 words. You said too much. I stared at that message for hours. Not because it hurt, but because it was exactly what I expected. Even now, with everything stripped bare, with the whole world holding up a mirror to their choices, they still thought the problem was that I spoke. Not that they'd stayed quiet when it mattered. I never responded. And a few days later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting that used to sign my report cards and tuck notes into lunchboxes. Inside, a letter from my mother. She wrote, "You should have come to us directly. We could have handled this like family. And all I could think was, when I did come to you, you shut the door. You left me holding the weight of your silence." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer with the others. Not out of bitterness, but because I was done trying to explain myself to people who only heard what made them feel comfortable. The world thought they knew my story now, but they only knew the headline, the triumph, the arc. Not the days when I cried in the shower, so Ava wouldn't hear. Not the mornings I stared at my own bank account and whispered, "Just hold out a little longer." Not the pain of realizing that the only time my name was spoken in that house was when a bill needed paying. And even now, as cameras flashed and voices praised and reporters leaned forward with awe in their eyes, I carried something heavier than success. I carried the knowledge that love shouldn't have to be earned through sacrifice, that loyalty without respect is a slow form of erasure, that sometimes surviving your own family is the hardest kind of survival. Ava once asked me why I never talk about Grandma and Grandpa. I told her the truth, soft but steady. Because some people in our lives teach us what to become, others teach us what not to accept. She nodded like she understood more than I wished she had to, and when she kissed my cheek and said, "I'm proud you're my mom," I felt more seen than I ever had sitting at any family table in Boulder. They know my name now, the whole world does, but my heart belongs to the little girl who fought beside me, to the man who held my hand when I was breaking, to the parents who weren't mine by blood, but by the quiet way they chose me when it counted. They know my story, but they'll never know my heart, because I finally stopped offering it to people who only knew how to take. It was a Wednesday morning in early spring, just before the first warmth could push the cold fully out of the air. I had just come back from a site meeting, Ava's drawing still folded in my coat pocket, when I heard it. A knock on the office glass door. It wasn't loud, not urgent, just steady. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't there to fight or explain, just to be heard. I didn't look right away. I stood by the filing cabinet, taking a breath, feeling that strange silence that sometimes hits just before the past tries to walk back in. Then I turned. It was my father. Same coat from that party 2 years ago, now more worn. His stance a little heavier, a little slower, like time had pressed down in places he never let anyone see. I opened the door halfway. Not to invite him in, just to see what he thought he could say now. He cleared his throat. "Nicole, I know this is unexpected. I don't want to waste your time. I thought maybe we could talk." I looked at him without speaking. The hallway behind him was quiet. No Claire, no Mom, just him, for once, not wrapped in a performance or protected by pre-approved stories. I stepped aside, not because I owed him the seat, but because I needed to know if he still had the same words, or if something, anything, had finally changed. He sat down across from me, hands on his knees. He didn't look me in the eye at first. I read what people wrote, online, about us, about you. I didn't expect it to get that big. I said nothing, just waited. He went on, slower this time. "I didn't come to ask for money, or to fix the store. I've had time to think, and I realized something. You were always there, not just when we needed help, but even when we didn't know we needed it." I looked at him, expression still calm. "You said if I showed up to Mom's birthday, I shouldn't call you my father." He flinched. I remember. "You didn't just say it, you meant it. You said I would embarrass the family. Because my job wasn't easy to explain. Because I didn't come with a man you could brag about." His voice cracked then. That was wrong. All of it. He rubbed his hands together like trying to wash something off. "Claire's not doing well. She's been distant. Blames us, blames you. But I know none of that matters now. What matters is I failed you. Not just that day, but for years." The words hit something inside me. Not pain, not anger, but a soft ache. Because for so long I had waited for him to see me. Now he did. And it didn't change the past, but maybe it made something less heavy. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Why now?" He looked up, and for the first time I saw it, Not just age, but regret. Because the house is empty, the store is gone, the applause is quiet, and when there's no one left to perform for, the truth gets louder. And the truth is, I'm not proud of who I was to you. I nodded. And yet when I needed you, all I got was silence. He didn't argue, he just sat there, hands still, eyes low. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say something before I can't anymore. We sat in silence for a long time, not hostile, just full of everything we never said when it mattered. Then I stood, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled out a folder. Inside, a printed list of all the payments I had made over those 2 years. Electric, water, repairs, groceries. I placed it in front of him. This is what I carried. Quietly, while you told me not to come home, while you told me I wasn't good enough, he stared at it, his eyes filled, but he didn't cry. I know. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. I nodded once. Good. He stood, slower now, and looked at me one last time. You turned into someone I don't even recognize anymore. And I mean that in the best way. I walked him to the door. He paused before stepping out. Your mom, she wanted to come, but she's still too proud. Or too afraid. I didn't answer. I opened the door wider. He walked out into the sunlit hallway. No hug, no promises, no requests. Just a quiet nod. And when the door closed behind him, I realized something. He hadn't come to break me. He had come to admit he couldn't. And that knock, it was the softest apology the world had ever seen. But even the softest ones leave echoes. And that was enough. 2 weeks passed after my father visited my office. He didn't call again. Neither did my mother. But the silence this time wasn't sharp or punishing, it was just quiet. Like the closing credits of a film that had finally stopped pretending it was still worth watching. I spent those days as I always did. Early meetings, project deadlines, Friday lunches with Ava. Everything outside moved as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted inside me. A loop had been left open too long. One more tether still connected me to the past I'd walked away from, and it was time to close it, so I made the call. Not to them, to our legal advisor. I want to formalize something, I said calmly. A statement of no financial responsibility for my parents. There was a pause. Are you sure? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I've given enough. He took down the details, and within days I had a draft contract ready. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, and writing them down so that no one could pretend they didn't see them. One signature, and I'd never be expected to send another dollar. One signature, and I'd never again have to explain that my silence wasn't cruelty, it was self-respect. That week Claire called. I didn't answer. She sent a message instead. I heard Dad came to see you. He's been different. You should talk to Mom. She's softer now. I think she regrets a lot. I read the message without emotion. I didn't want softness. I wanted memory. I wanted her to remember how I sat alone on Mom's birthday while they posed for pictures with guests. I wanted her to remember how they texted me only when the Wi-Fi went down or the fridge broke. But I didn't reply. Because even that silence was a decision. The next morning I walked into the office early and printed the contract. 2 copies. No flourish. Just legal, black and white. At 10 a.m. I drove to the coffee shop where Claire had asked to meet. She arrived late. As always. She wore soft colors and carried a face full of hesitation. Nicole, she started, before you say anything, I want to say thank you. For staying calm, for never making this worse. I didn't respond. I placed the document on the table. What's this? She asked. A release of all expectations, I said. It states that from this day forward, I owe nothing emotionally, financially, or otherwise to Mom and Dad. She blinked, like the words were too strange to be real. You're cutting them off? I shook my head. No. I'm just making sure everyone understands that I've already given what I had to give. There's nothing left to take. Claire picked up the papers, flipped through them slowly, then looked up. Mom won't sign this. Then don't bring it to her, I said. It's not about their signature, it's about mine. Her face shifted. Hurt, confusion, something else. They're not the same anymore, she whispered. Neither am I replied. She reached for my hand. Nicole, I miss you. I pulled back gently. You miss the person who didn't say no? I don't exist anymore. She didn't fight me. She just nodded slowly, and, for the first time, I saw it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. I folded the paper, slipped it into my bag, and stood up. Tell Mom she can call me when she wants to talk about something other than herself. Claire looked up at me with eyes full of 1,000 things she didn't know how to say, but I didn't wait to hear them. I walked out into the sunlight, the breeze cool but clean, and as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I felt it. Not triumph, not power, closure. The loop had closed, not with a slam, not with a scream, just with a steady click, like the last puzzle piece sliding quietly into place. Behind me, the door didn't swing shut. It eased back slowly, like even the world knew this wasn't about anger. It was about release, and when I looked up at the sky, gray but open, I realized something. The pain they gave me had been real, but so was my healing, and this time, it was mine. All mine. Part 2 of the 2009 story, Blood is Strength, From the Heat at Night and Sun, by E.J. A week after I handed Claire the contract, nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no late-night emails disguised as checking in. And oddly, that silence didn't sting. It settled, like fresh snow on a street no longer traveled. I had expected them to lash out, or at least resist, but sometimes even the people who once held power over you know when they've lost the right to speak. I carried on. The work didn't slow. Deadlines stacked, my team hit milestones, and Ava turned 7. She asked if her grandparents would be coming to her birthday party. I paused, then knelt down and said gently, "Not this year." She didn't cry. She just nodded and said, "Okay, maybe next year if they stop being mean." I smiled and kissed the top of her head. That was the thing about kids. They understood more than we gave them credit for, and somehow they always knew who had really been there. The party came and went, laughter filled our modest home, balloons, a backyard treasure hunt, cupcakes we frosted ourselves, no tension, no pretending, just joy. That night, when I tucked Ava in, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "You're my favorite person in the whole world." I held her longer than usual. Not because I needed reassurance, but because in that moment, I realized I had everything I once thought I had to chase. I didn't need to prove I was worthy. I didn't need to stand at the gates of my parents' approval, begging to be let in. I had built a life that didn't require permission, and I had done it with my own hands. Days turned into weeks, then one afternoon, as I stood by the office window, watching the sky turn from gold to gray, my assistant walked in. "Someone dropped this off for you. No return name." She handed me a cream-colored envelope. I turned it over. My mother's handwriting. Instinct made my chest tighten. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Neat cursive. Careful words. "Nicole, we've been talking about everything. Your father and I realize now that we may have been too proud, too focused on appearances. We didn't know how to love you properly. We're sorry, truly." I stared at the letter, read it once, then again. But I felt nothing, not anger, not relief, not forgiveness, just stillness. Years ago, I would have clutched this letter like oxygen. I would have cried over it, folded it carefully into a journal, read it when the old pain started to creep in. But now, it was just ink on paper, the apology I thought I'd die without. I didn't even need any more. I placed it gently in the drawer of my desk and closed it. Not to hide it, not to cherish it, just to let it rest. A few days later, Ava found an old photo album at the back of my closet. "Who are these people?" she asked, pointing to a Thanksgiving picture. I looked at the image, me, younger, smiling tightly between my parents and Claire. I knelt beside Ava. "That was my family a long time ago," I said. She tilted her head. "Are they nice?" I thought about it, then shook my head slowly. They didn't know how to be. She nodded like that answer made perfect sense and flipped the page. No follow-up questions, no longing, just curiosity satisfied. That night, as I lay in bed, the wind howled outside, sweeping through the trees like a memory trying to get in. But my windows were shut, my doors locked. Not out of fear, just out of understanding that not everything deserved a return. I had walked the long road of rejection, carried the weight of being the daughter who was never enough. And still, here I was, whole, standing, breathing deeper than I ever had before. The woman I had become, the one who smiled at Ava's questions, who led boardroom meetings with steady hands, who didn't flinch when her sister said she was cold now. That woman didn't need her parents' apology to know her own worth. She didn't live with spite in her chest or revenge in her veins. She just lived, fully, quietly, powerfully. I turned out the light and let the darkness settle, peaceful, undisturbed. Because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need to win. I didn't need to be right. I didn't need anything at all. I had become someone who no longer needed their apology. And that, in itself, was the loudest truth I'd ever spoken. Without saying a word. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for an apology, a message, a call, a moment that says, "You mattered, we were wrong." And when it doesn't come, they carry that silence like a weight on their chest, hoping that one day it will lift. But sometimes, healing doesn't arrive in someone else's words. It begins the day you stop needing them. The day you look at your own reflection and say, "I am enough," not because they finally see it, but because I always was. That's the shift. That's the quiet revolution, when you stop begging to be seen in rooms that were never built for you. When you stop waiting at doors that were locked long before you arrived, and you turn instead to build a home, not made of bricks or inheritance, but of peace, of boundaries, of love. You chose and gave and received without conditions. That is not bitterness. That is clarity. That is freedom. So if you're listening to this, and there's a part of you still hoping they'll come around, still aching for closure, I want you to know something. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. You are not selfish for walking away from pain dressed up as obligation. And you are absolutely allowed to stop setting yourself on fire just to keep others warm. The most powerful revenge isn't loud. It isn't angry. It's simply this: living a full, honest life, without shrinking, without explaining. And when they finally look back and realize who you became, they won't recognize the person they once overlooked. That's not your burden to carry anymore. If this story spoke to something in you, if it felt like a chapter of your own life, let us know in the comments. Because sometimes just knowing someone else has walked the same road is enough to keep going. And if you believe in stories that speak the truth behind the silence, don't forget to follow this channel. Because the quietest voices often hold the loudest truths.